My sense is he spent a lot of time really concerned with the detection and measurement of nuclear radiation. I know he also spent a lot of time with testing nuclear weapons, which was really interesting to hear some of the adventures he did in New Mexico and Nevada. And every time he would come back from a nuclear test, he would bring back a native Indian Kachina doll. And so my mother's mantelpiece has 100 or so Kachina dolls. Yeah, one thing he bragged about is that he had the same office from 1952 to 2000 when he died. And I can attest, I would visit there every so often. He had the same furniture and the same furnishings. Yeah, he was very proud of that he had the same office. Well, I visit his facility in Fort Monmouth every so often as a child. And as you can imagine, having nuclear radiation and sources, there was a lot of shielding, so really thick concrete. So it looked like a tomb, like an ancient tomb. And so he painted one, and he painted himself one with Egyptian hieroglyphs, so it looked like an Egyptian tomb, and the other he painted with Mayan decorations, and both you can see, both were featured in the newspaper, and was a big hit. His goal was to measure the radiation profile right at the weapon. And I know that was a really difficult thing to do because obviously any sort of detector or wire would be instantly vaporized. And I think that was a real accomplishment. One of the inventions he had, I remember him telling me about this, is he saw one of those camp lighters where you squeeze the thing and it hits a crystal and makes a spark. And he said, well, why can't I use that for charging dosimeters? And so he came up with a very simple, no battery device. It was kind of this thing that you squeeze, and as you squeeze it presses a crystal, creates a voltage, and would charge dosimeters. And that saved tons of money, weight, it was very durable, very simple, and so that's another thing I remember he did. He had so many achievements. I could tell you some other things that he did. He was involved with several trips to the Arctic, to Greenland and the Arctic, and the goal was to measure to detect a magnetic monopole. And it was great to get postcards from him from Greenland. He spent a lot of time in Camp Tuto, which is a camp far, very near the Arctic Circle, really remote. And he had deal with blizzards, polar bears. One time he was doing his experiment near the North Pole, and a Russian submarine broke through the ice, and these Russian sailors came out and started playing volleyball. This is one of his favorite stories. I don't know if it's appropriate for this, but he had a nuclear test one time where he was the director of the test. And apparently when they pressed the button, nothing happened. So nobody knew if it was just like a short and the wind's going to blow and something, it's going to go off. So he himself had to, as test director, had to go and take the Jeep and go and figure out what's going on. And at the gate for the evacuated zone, the soldier, the guard there kind of saluted him and said, "Doctor, it was great knowing you, and go ahead." So he had to drive, I don't know, the 50 miles to the tower, climb the tower, and he said it was one of the loneliest, scariest things, but he managed to sort that out. But that was one of his favorite stories. So my father was born in Poland in 1927, and in 1939 the Germans invaded. And he was subjected to having to learn German in school. He was subjected to Nazi dogma. And then, since he was 12 years old, and then in 1942, he was 16, he was forced to fight. And he got terribly wounded. He was shot in the chest. Luckily, the bullet hit his breastbone. He had shrapnel in his arm from a grenade. He's always going through metal detectors, would always set them off. Managed to be evacuated, managed to survive, lived by his wits through the end of the war. Made his way to Austria. He was 18 years old in 1945. Went through high school, college, and got his PhD by the time he was 25 years old, which is quite an achievement. And so here he is in 1952. What is he going to do? He had a postdoc in Jakarta, and then at the last minute, the Army asked him to come over through a program called Project Paperclip. And like I said before, he spent his entire time from 1952 all the way to 2000 in CECOM and the previous iterations of CECOM. He had the same office, and I would say he always loved the Army and CECOM for that opportunity. My father was essentially given free rein to figure out from a scientific or an engineering or a development perspective, basically free rein, what is the best way to make a contribution to the study of radiation and the application of measuring radiation. And I think what was so great about that was he was allowed to use his creativity, and that creativity resulted in so many unexpected contributions, and I think that's a really important thing going forward, that the government and the military continue to have some R&D set aside for really scientific investigation, creative, non-directed creative scientific investigation.